Good morning from Santo Domingo. I'm Elisabeth Robert, and I'm very happy to be online with you today for our third and last webinar in the context of our moderated course on gender responsive budgeting. We have been together for 2 months and 1 week now, and the course will end in 3 weeks. And for this webinar, we also invited colleagues who participated in our face-to-face course in Istanbul 2 weeks ago. They are interested in knowing different experiences, and I think this presentation can be useful for them. So thank you very much for attending. I would like to thank also Rouba Arja, Carla Ziade, and Wiebke Uhde, sorry for the pronunciation, for accepting our invitation. They participated in our face-to-face course on GRB last year and kept us informed on their work on GRB at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, ESCWA. So we really appreciate to keep in contact with participants of our courses. And I think that little by little, we are creating a global community of practice on GRB. So thank you, Rouba, Carla, and Wiebke for your presentation today. Let me present them briefly. Wiebke began her career with the German Bilateral Cooperation, GIZ, in Sub-Saharan Africa as an expert for monitoring and evaluation. She subsequently joined the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, in 2010, where she supported the planning, monitoring, and evaluation of humanitarian emergency responses. And since 2017, Wiebke works as a program manager officer with a focus on strategic planning, quality management, and gender issues at UN ESCWA. Carla joined the ESCWA in 2003 to work for a year in research at the Statistics Division. And within ESCWA, she moved to budget and finance sections, where she performed a wide range of budgetary and financial functions for almost 12 years. Since 2016, she worked in the program planning and technical cooperation section at ESCWA on strategic planning and monitoring. And Rouba Arja is Social Affairs Officer, currently working at ESCWA in the Center for Women. Her work focuses on gender and development issues in the Arab region, including mainstreaming gender equality in policies and public institutions. She previously served as First Population Affairs Officer in the Social Development Division of ESCWA and has led the preparation of reports and the implementation of projects on population and social inclusion policies. Sorry, I didn't show the photos. I was reading. So here are our 3 panelists. Before starting, I would just like to explain how the interaction with you works today. So as you see, you have a menu with called questions. So at any moment during the webinar, you can click here, write your question or comment, and Sabrina, who is with us today, will collect those questions, and we will show the question at the end of the presentation to have the question and answer session. So do not hesitate to write them all along the presentation, and we will take them into account. I forgot to say that, of course, we are a team today. Alexandra, who is the moderator of the course, online course, is with us. And we have also Sabrina and Dejan, who support us here in the training center. So I'll give also for you to know that, as usual, this webinar is recorded, and we will put it in the our YouTube channel. So that people who could not attend today can watch the video, and also a broader audience in general. So now I'm giving the mic to Wiebke so that she can start with her presentation. Thank you very much.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone from Beirut. I'm going to start our presentation with giving you a little bit of an overview. I'll start introducing the context, that is ESCWA and the region in which it works, and the basis that we've already had in place when Carla, Rouba, and I started developing our internal GRB plan. Then I'll hand over to Carla, who will speak extensively about one of our most important tools that we have developed that allows us to advance with gender responsive budgeting. And then I have merged, I'm sorry I didn't reflect that in the presentation outline, we have merged the process for preparing the plan and the structure of the plan. So that will be the fourth part of the presentation and challenges and accomplishments. And there you have the pleasure that Rouba will present this part. So let me start with the context, the introduction to the Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia. The Commission is part of the United Nations Secretariat and serves 18 member states of Western Asia and North Africa. That is from Mauritania to Saudi Arabia. We're covering 18 member countries. These member states come together at ESCWA, which provides a platform for them. They can exchange and cooperate on economic and social issues, mostly within the frameworks of international conventions and global agreements. That means in preparation for global conferences, at ESCWA we foster a vision of the Arabic region that will be communicated at global consultations, but it also works vice versa, that decisions and consultations from the global will trickle through the region to the country level, a process that we facilitate here at ESCWA. ESCWA is mainly a home of expertise and knowledge, and that means we do produce a lot of new knowledge for the region, studies and publication that do help our member states to formulate and harmonize sectoral policies. That is, we understand ourselves as threefold with three main functions. As I've mentioned before, the think tank function is our platform for reflection and knowledge production, our production of reports and studies. Then we understand the Commission as the voice of the region on global and international matters. That means consultations and meetings of experts on certain topics. And we do also advise our member states through capacity building and technical cooperation. That means the translation of policy into guidelines on the ground at the country level. To move to the next slide, I'll quickly introduce the topics that we cover, because we are working on 7 important issues of the region. One is generally social developments, that is social justice, that talks to disability in the region. We also foster economic development, topics such as trade agreements, a custom union. We discuss development planning, and we advance generally policies on taxation, just to give you some examples. Our division with technology for development deals with artificial intelligence, big data, and all the topics that do come up, innovation as an enabler for the 2030 agenda for the SDGs. The Sustainable Environmental Department deals with issues of energy in the region, water and food security, as well as the big challenge of climate change. And the Governance and Conflict-related division deals with governance issues, political participation, but also deals with the conflict-affected countries of our region and monitors the occupation on Palestine. Then we have our division for gender equality and women empowerment. Rouba is part of that division with 3 main pillars, that is violence against women, woman peace and security, and gender justice. And our statistics division deals with harmonizing statistics across the entire region. In our support to member states, we follow 2 approaches. That is to deliver our program of work, as I've mentioned, technical assistance on the ground, and knowledge production and knowledge dissemination. And just on a little side note, so that is maybe of interest for you, the Commission has a relative stable budget that is set by New York, and that is more or less static. We don't have much flexibility in the way the budget comes, meaning the different budget lines and the funds allocated to these. So let's now, after this brief introduction into our commission, we would like to present a little bit what was the basis that we've already had in place before we went to Serbia to attend the training and develop our plan. When it comes to our approach to advance gender equality and women empowerment, the Commission follows a twin-track approach. One is that gender equality issues are mainstreamed in the entire program of work of all the divisions into the program and products. And then, as already said, we do have the Center for Women that specifically advances women empowerment and gender equality. In addition to that, over the past years, it's been, I think, even 5 years, if not longer, ESCWA has been very engaged in the implementation of the UN SWAP. For those of you who don't know what the UN SWAP is, it is a system-wide action plan to advance gender equality and women empowerment that UN Women has put in place and that all UN departments and agencies adhere to. In ESCWA, we've had a very positive experience with implementing the SWAP and wanted to just name a few of our results that came out of the implementation of the plan. That is, for example, a very strong internal gender equality policy, which is just under review to develop a new one for the next 4 years. We have introduced the gender marker that tags all our work-related outputs and monitors expenditures. Carla will speak to that in a few minutes. We have introduced continuous capacity building of staff on gender-related issues. A strong gender focal point network has been put in place that is comprised of at least 2 staff members at the P4 level and above from all the different divisions and is responsible for mainstreaming gender issues in the entire program of work of each division. And last but not least, flexible working arrangements have been put in place so that women and mothers can cater to their needs and still do their work. Now, with all this in place, the decision to go forward with the implementation of, or with the development of a GRB plan comes or lies on the fact that while there has been a lot of efforts going on, these have been a little bit dispersed, but they're promising. And so we said, okay, we would like to go and advance our knowledge on GRB to potentially implement GRB in the Commission. So just to give an example, what has been done in the last years, there's been an increasing consciousness and also willingness by staff, senior management, and our member states to acknowledge that gender equality is a very important issue and that there is a need to look not only at 50% of the population, but to include everybody in all in our programs. So we have definitely that. Then the action plan for the introduction of the GRB has been developed at the organizational level. Rouba will speak to you on the details of that. And then we thought to institutionalize GRB through the identification of existing entry points. That means rather than creating new frameworks, to be able to weave strategically our intent of GRB into existing points. Also, Rouba will explain that in detail later. And then for the SWAP, of course, there's been, how can I say that, not a restructuring, but alignment of processes and also internal infrastructure that allows us to implement the SWAP. And now with no further ado, I know that this is the most interesting part of the presentation. I'll hand over to Carla, who has been our champion in implementing the gender marker in ESCWA, and she will show you a few slides on what we've been doing and how we've implemented that tool. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is Carla. Thank you, Wiebke. This is Carla, and I'm going to walk you through the slides and we will be discussing the gender marker, basically how it was, when it was actually introduced at ESCWA, what are the different levels and values of the gender marker, We're going to be looking at basically what are the tools that we have at ESCWA, what efforts we put in place in order to develop these tools. And so let us just start by saying that the gender marker was introduced at ESCWA basically in 2013. This is when we rolled out the gender marker within the organization. It was adopted by ESCWA, and it came from basically the values and the definitions came from the UNDG, the UN Development Group. That is in an effort to standardize or to standardize a common approach across all entities. The 4 values that we have, as you can see on the slide, gender blind, limited, significant, and principled. And we also have criteria for all values and levels of the gender marker. We use these markers in the different deliverables and products that we work on at ESCWA, and we'll see in a separate slide what are the criteria and how we actually use these markers. Because we have actually developed detailed criteria for each of the above categories in relation to all products and services that are provided at ESCWA. One of the slides will show you how we use the markers in the research products. The introduction of the marker is actually done at the planning stage at ESCWA, and we use it actually to monitor financial resources. So basically it has, we use it for basically 2 dimensions. The first one is the monitoring of resources. So we're tagging all of our products with a gender marker, which allows us to track our expenditures and see how much investments actually we're making in each area. And then also, this is also very important because it allows us to, it triggers actually a thinking process within ESCWA as how basically you can mainstream a gender perspective to all the work program and the work that we're doing at ESCWA and the services that we are actually providing to our member countries. And ESCWA, we believe that it is necessary to develop certain criteria. So now we have the slide, we're looking at this slide that shows us that we have developed criteria to inform the professional staff and staff working on the ESCWA work program about the use of the gender marker. For instance, we have already detailed criteria in the field of research, but we're also putting an effort in order to also develop additional criteria for example, if we have an expert group meetings. I'm sorry, we already have the ones on the expert group meetings, but maybe for other products that ESCWA is producing. So let's take an example. For instance, if we take one of ESCWA's deliverables and then we see the significant tag on it, that means that it's the gender sensitive perspective and approaches are mainstream throughout the research. And this, we're talking definitely about a deliverable that falls in the category of research. It's a research product. It's sex disaggregated data is used on the primary and secondary levels. Gender sensitive analysis of the data is employed. Gender sensitive language is used throughout the research. Findings and recommendations reflect the different needs and priorities of both men and women. So this is the kind of criteria that we use when we're looking at our products at the planning stage, and we were trying to basically put or add a tag to our deliverables. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so we talked about the tools, and at ESCWA we have 2 tools. One is internally developed, so it's actually developed internally at ESCWA. It is not actually a common tool used by the other UN entities. This is our work planning tool. It was not developed only for purposes of tracking the gender marker at ESCWA, but mainly this is our internal monitoring tool. It carries all of our program information about all of the ESCWA program, and it's very useful for during our monitoring and planning processes. But also it has a space where we can add our markers. So, and we're not talking here only about the gender marker, because at ESCWA we use a youth marker, sustainable development integration marker, and also we try to add the sustainable development goals to tag our deliverables with the SDGs. This slide shows a pivot table that is retrieved from the work planning portal, and it shows us, for example, if you look under output, you see 3 different outputs, and then you see the tagging that is carried by each one by each of the deliverables. For instance, the Arab Sustainable Development Report carries a tag value of significant. And then, for instance, the youth marker is partially integrated, fully integrated. What this tool actually allows us to do, as I said before, this tool provides us with more statistics, like mainly numbers. How many, or what is the percentage of outputs that are significant, tagged as significant? And here we're talking about the gender marker, but we can do that for all other markers as well. But for instance, it gives us statistics across all ESCWA, or for instance, as Wiebke mentioned, because at ESCWA we have different working areas by sub-program. For instance, if we can look at what our colleagues in the Technology for Development team are doing in terms of deliverables, and then we can see a summary of the taggings, like the statistics of how many outputs are tagged and the distribution of the outputs in the categories of the markers. So that is really helpful in order for us to, and I'll provide, if we move on please to the next slide, it will show us exactly what we're actually talking about here. This is a screenshot of the dashboard that we produced from this portal, and this is basically these are basically the statistics across all ESCWA in terms of output. So these are the various markers that we're using, except for the SDGs, because they're put on a separate tab. And here we can see the distribution of the gender marker. For example, we have at ESCWA 9% of our outputs are principal, 31% significant, 52%, which is basically half of what we do, is limited, and 8% blind. So this gives us an indication of the number, and why when I said that it triggers a thinking process, it tells us, like, yeah, you can go back maybe to the deliverables that you have that are tagged as blind and see what you can do to improve maybe. So it just triggers a thinking process, and you know, it gets people to talk to each other based on the statistics that we're pulling out. And not only that, because from this portal we can pull out business intelligence reports, and we can put together different parameters and be able to pull out certain analysis and look at the data from different angles, for instance, gender versus let's say SDGs. And that is very also helpful to have an internal discussion. Now, that is on the first system that is developed internally. If we move on to the next slide, it will show us 2 different pie charts, but these 2 are pulled out from 2 different systems. So the first one is the work planning that we just saw, and then the second one, it shows us actually the distribution by resources. And then I'll show you in the coming slides how we use the financial system and how we adapted our financial system to be able to capture the expenditure by marker. Now, the first pie chart shows us the statistics, as I said, and this is basically the information that is pulled out for one of the sub-programs at ESCWA. It is not for all ESCWA. So one of the sub-programs shows that, for example, 28% of the deliverables that they are producing during the upcoming cycle are gender blind. If we move on to the next pie chart, it shows us in terms of resources that we're using 10% of the resources of this sub-program. I'm sorry, can we go back? Can we go back? I'm still talking about the previous slide. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so on the second pie chart here, we're looking at 10% of expenditure being invested in gender-blind outputs. So it doesn't mean that if we have 28% of, say, deliverables that are gender-blind, it doesn't mean that we have equal investments and expenditure that is invested. Also, if you look at the 90% are limited. 90% of the resources so far that are spent on deliverables that are tagged as limited, while on the other side, 63% of them, in terms of count statistics, are actually limited. So this also, the combination of, if you look at the two information, the two sets of information that we have, we can also maybe this will allow us to dig further and see, look at the distribution of resources that we currently have, and maybe rethink the distribution of the resources to see how we can better do at outputs, for instance, that are tagged as gender blind. Can we move on to the next slide so I can show you now how we do actually practically the tagging in our system? We have a system, it's an ERP, it's called Umoja, it's common for all the UN Secretariat, used by all UN entities. This system has a component that is called the project builder, and this is where we build our program. So we actually reflect it, we mirror it in the project builder. When I say our program, it means that for each of the areas of work that we have at ESCWA, if it's the Center for Women or Technology for Development, or maybe the Social Development Division, each one of them has for their own subprogram an objective, the main objective of the subprogram. Then we have expected accomplishments, which are the outcomes. Then come the indicators, and in order to accomplish all of that, we have all of our deliverables that are tied to this framework. So this is how we reflected in the project builder. We map our deliverables to the expected accomplishments and indicators of achievements that fall under the objective, and we give them an identification code. In this case, if you look at the one that is highlighted, this one is P309. So what ESCWA is actually, what this subprogram, this is EDID, Economic Development and Integration. For this particular subprogram, they have an activity or a deliverable that is called Expert Group Meeting on Arab Multidimensional Poverty. And so for this activity falls under expected accomplishment 1, reduce poverty by multidimensional approach. It's actually the summary of the longer title, but I mean, the system allows you to write very short description. Now, if you look at this deliverable, actually, and if you look at the right side, there is another small window showing a set of information under the UN Assignments tab. And under the UN Assignments tab, if you look at the third section, it's called Thematic Assignment. There are 2 assignment fields, 1 and 2. These are the 2 assignment fields that we are using to tag our deliverables. So if you look at assignment 1, it is carrying, actually, we're making use of the space because we have very limited fields to use to tag our outputs. So we use the assignment field 1 for 2 taggings. So it's the combination of 2 taggings. So this one carries the tagging of significant for the gender marker and partially integrated for the sustainable development integration marker. So imagine that all of the outputs at deliverables at ESCWA, all of them carry a tagging, and here we're talking specifically about the gender, let's say. So all of our deliverables carry a tagging. So that is how we can actually pull out information on how much we're spending against this particular output, and therefore, I'm sorry. We can also pull out information on how much we've spent across all ESCWA for the significant, for the marker that is markers that are tagged significant. And the way this is done actually is for each deliverable there is an account. So every time our substantive offices or the offices working on the delivery of the program, they want to, let's say, hire a consultant or travel or hold an EGM, they need to spend. So when they're spending, they are actually using this specific account code that is provided in Umoja for this particular output. And this is how we are actually pooling all the expenditure that are relative to this particular output in one box. And if this box is tagged by a gender marker, then you will be able to pull out the expenditure for this particular output, as well as all the outputs that are tagged as significant. So this is, in summary, how things work in the system, in the financial system. I'm sorry, can we move on to the next slide, please? Yeah, we can skip this one because we thought that it would be clearer on this one. It's the same. Okay, now here are a few examples of what kind of outputs we produce and the distribution of these outputs, like very few of them, and how they are distributed among the markers. For instance, under gender blind, we have a quarterly inflation outlook, and this is under statistics, an e-bulletin on external trade statistics in the Arab region, statistics, so mainly they are statistical. If you look at the limited, there is a working paper series on economic issues in the region, economic development. If you look at significant technology, entrepreneurship, opportunities and constraints for Arab youth and women, this is under technology for development. If you go to principal, there's an interagency and expert group on gender statistics. So this is purely statistics, that's purely gender statistics. That is why it's principal. So the main purpose of this output is actually the gender. And so, as I said, I mean, the tagging happens at the planning stage, but also we get to discuss. So it's subject to discussion with the program managers. And that is the beauty of all of that. So when you're using a marker, actually, at the planning stage, you're saying, okay, I'm producing a publication or a research paper or that, but then you're asking yourself, okay, so what is it? Is it principal, significant, limited, or blind? And then you ask yourself, if you say limited, then you ask yourself why, and then okay, you refer to the criteria. But then you can also ask yourself, how am I going to improve it, maybe, and go maybe a level, let's say, and improve it and go a level upwards. So that's all from my side. I will pass, give the floor to my colleague Rouba. And thank you very much. We're waiting for your questions at the end.
Thank you, Carla. Actually, in this third part, I will explain a little bit the preparation of the plan GRB. Next slide, please. Actually, we went back from the training and we were tasked with the preparation of a GRB plan for the organization. So we started by, based on the learning we did, we started by like a situation analysis. What do we have? What tools do we have? What progress so far? What equipment available that can support this endeavor? And it is at this stage that we could do like a tracking of all the progress we've done. We could, for example, see the importance of the marker, the importance of the infrastructure we have, the gender focal point network, and actually we realized that we have a solid basis. This solid basis is very much related to the implementation of the SWAP. However, for those who know the SWAP is a reporting tool. It's not like a planning tool. So we realized that we have bits and pieces everywhere that need to be brought all together and that need to be built in a way to have like a cumulative plan, whereby we have a result and then we can build on this result and continue building over years. And also during the training, we understand the necessity of defining a clear objective. We have to have a clear objective for the RB, and also the necessity to work in parallel on the program and on the budget. And we realized that the the dispersed efforts we have do not bring together program and budget in a constructive way. We were working on the program, on the budget, but we needed to bring everything together. So what we did is that we scrutinized the process and the stages of programming and budgeting of ESCWA, of the Secretariat, because it's part of the Secretariat. And what we did is we tried at each of these 5 stages to identify like necessary action or relevant action whereby we can make our program and budget more sensitive, more gender sensitive, and taking more gender into consideration. But also, so we did this like a huge work on identifying action at each and every stage. We went into the nitty-gritty, but then given the enormous task for the implementation, we decided to develop different alternatives whereby we can, for example, implement the GRB in stages and for the coming 5 or 6 years. And what we did, and we think is also very important, is we also identified the capacity building needed for the staff and the employees to be able to implement this plan. We put everything together and then we discussed the plan with our senior management, and we are now at this stage. Next slide, please. So as I said, the structure of the GRB plan, of ESCWA GRB plan now, is very much in line with the stages of program and budget of ESCWA that most probably will be changing in the in 2020, but still we have like a very good understanding of the action at each stage, so it will be easy for us also like to update this plan. But so far it's made of 5 stages. The first one is about the preparation of the strategic framework, and we thought that it's very important to start implementing, introducing the GRB as general directive at this stage. So from the onset of the thinking of our strategic direction, to have gender very much linked into the this thinking of the program. And then the second stage is the budget preparation. So based on the vision, we went also into identifying the needed action. So the internal instruction by the administration take gender into consideration, and also to identify potential entry point in order for us to introduce the GRB. And then we looked at the implementation stage, because this is also a stage that we consider as very important, because here we can very much link our like objectives and planning. As Carla said, gender marker is a step at the early planning, but then in the implementation we went into all the mechanisms that allow us to control the quality and to make sure that what we plan for is what we get in the output at the end. For example, we have planned for an EGM to be significant in the planning stages. We also need to develop the mechanisms throughout the implementation to make sure that this EGM, when implemented, will be really significant and will meet all the criteria for the significant gender marker. And what we did at this stage is we tried to adapt all the existing tools and adapt them to the needs of like a strong GRB plan. So here we have, as I said, the quality control mechanism in addition to the financial components. Next slide, please. Also we looked at the reporting stage to make sure that we will be reporting on this work in order to show and in order to be able also to demonstrate how it was done and how it could be done, and to end up with an evaluation stage also that is very important in order to come up with the lessons learned in order to start building for the coming planning and implementing exercise. Actually, I went through these stages very quickly. Actually, we have our plan that is very detailed, but the objective of this presentation is to show the importance of going into each and every stage and into identifying at each and every stage like the relevant actions and the relevant entry point. And this makes a difference between what we're doing on the UN SWAP and a real GRB, a real like a very well constructed GRB plan. It's not about like indicators and reporting on dispersed indicators, but a plan that links very well program into budget. Next slide, please. I will talk a little bit about the challenges and our accomplishments so far, and this will explain a little bit also how we are envisaging to overcome these challenges. Actually, it wasn't, and it's still not easy for us to formulate a clear objective, because here, you know, we can have many objectives. One of them could be, for example, to follow the objectives of the gender division. Let's say to gear all our work for a specific objective that is reducing discrimination or eliminating discrimination against women. This is one option, but the other option would be also to make sure that mainstreaming is taking place in a very proper way, so that all the areas we're working on are delivering well to 100% of the population, as Wiebke said. And maybe the objective could be like a twin track approach, which is a mix of both. But it is challenging for us, like, to define a very clear objective that could be the most relevant for the region and for our work. And the second challenge is our limited influence on the budget. Actually, our budget is mainly approved in the member states, and we are getting over almost the same budget with like slight changes. That's why the most important, if to make the best out of this budget, it's not like to raise or to increase the budget, but is to make sure to have like a minimum number of blind products, and to make sure that all our products are in categories like principal and significant. And also here is the important work on the program to make sure that all the quality control mechanisms, all the mechanisms needed to implement are in place, and also all the capacities needed are in place. And related to this is also like the wide range of issues ESCWA work on. As Wiebke explained, we work on economic, we have several several priorities in social, with several priorities in environment, with several priorities. So having the capacity to mainstream gender properly in all these areas technically is not an easy task, and this is also part of our gender responsive plan. And actually, what we did is to develop like a kind of actually we're calling it a catalog whereby we identified the capacity for also by like kind of or type of staff. If you're working on as administrative, if you're working as author of publication, if you're working as research assistant, so to have the relevant capacities for all staff across the board. So far, we're very proud to know that we have like great awareness of the importance of the issue, the gender, gender issue, and gender issue is being more and more debated in a more and more constructive way at ESCWA, and the capacity of staff is increasing, and actually we're doing like regularly assessments, and we're realizing that the capacity is increasing. Gender is now more and more present in all our communication, and we were able to influence also the debate at the HQ level, actually based on our performance in the swap and what we're doing for the gender marker. We were able to contribute better and more and influence a little bit the debate at HQ level, including a working group on gender financing. And as Carla has very well explained, we have like the necessary internal infrastructure and processes to be able to support this gender budgeting exercise by pulling our expenditures by marker. And even though we don't have like a huge percentage or a big percentage of our products with principal and significant, but the most important is that we are able to see, to assess very well, and then to put all the effort to improve. And we have also a great involvement of the gender focal point network that is supporting the overall process. Next slide, because I think this is. Next slide, please. And I think that's it. We have now like we're looking forward for your questions, and we thank you for your time and your interest. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I think we had a lot of information in this presentation. We already received questions, so I give the floor to Sabrina. Sabrina, can we see the, and I will allow you to share your screen also. Sorry. So here you should be able to share your screen, Sabrina, now.
Yes. So thank you all three for the really informative presentation. So let's share the first question. So what were the gender sensitive language used? Can you give some examples? Who wants to take the question?
Actually, we're trying to make this kind of tools available for all our publication. We're a think tank that work on producing knowledge, and we make this language or the guidelines available for everyone. So it's like we're trying to have it used everywhere in all our communication and products.
Okay, thank you, Rouba. So the next question is, who is in charge of attributing the markers? How do you ensure that the category really reflects the reality on how gender equality is mainstreamed in a product or program?
Okay, I'm taking this question. Thank you. The program managers who are developing their annual work program are responsible for attributing the markers in the first place. Yet the program planning section that Carla and I work in, we are scrutinizing and criticizing and asking questions to ensure that the markers are set on the right stage. Then we do have some quality assurance mechanisms that, as Rouba mentioned in the plan, that come in the implementation stage. For example, we have a publications committee that reviews concept notes for every single knowledge product that ESCWA produces. And there we do ask and wonder, there is a whole box on how do you in mainstream gender, how do you use statistics and data in order to ensure that gender can be or will be reflected in this research. The same committee reviews the final manuscript, and that is the stage when either Carla or I read the report and scrutinize again whether, or Rouba as well, ECW also reads. I mean, many people do read the products, and then do an assessment based on the criteria we have developed, whether that happened. We have also some guidelines on how to, it's a white paper on how to mainstream gender in research that is more detailed as to the whole research process and how this can be engendered. So this is how we audit the, this is how we audit the markers. Rouba wants to make a little addition, right? That some of the concept notes are also reviewed in the Gender Focal Point Network, because this is where we do have the substantive experts who can give an informed decision on whether that concept note fulfills the requirement of the markers. Oh, sorry, that's it. I hope I answered the question holistically.
Yeah, thank you, Wiebke. So the next question is for Carla. Do you have targets to improve the gender marker score per year? And you said that gender marker tagging happens during planning stage. Do you review whether those tags were correct afterwards during the evaluation?
Hi, okay. First, do you have targets to improve the gender marker score per year? We don't have targets to improve, not yet actually. And also, it all falls back to what the program manager wants to actually achieve and the result, and then what are the deliverables that they are producing that will achieve the result. But I mean, what Wiebke explained are the actually the quality assurance mechanisms that we have in place that make sure that throughout the whole process, we're saying that we do that at the planning stage. They determine what is the tag that the deliverable will carry, but also throughout the process, there are the different mechanisms that are in place to ensure that the tagging is actually accurate. Now, at the evaluation, afterwards, during evaluation, there is a gender component in the standard evaluation that we do, but not necessarily following the marker, the gender marker. Do you want to add something? Yeah, if you would like that.
I also wanted to refer back to the slide that we have prepared on giving examples of some of our outputs and their markers. I mean, we looked through the program to give you some examples. For just on top of my head, I put in an output, if I recall, the e-bulletin on trade statistics is really just a set of numbers on trade statistics, and will never be anything other than gender blind, because it doesn't even look at any question when it comes to that you could disaggregate. When we talk about population censuses, of course, we are pushing for a disaggregated collection of data in the region. So we do have a very diverse set of outputs. Some do lend themselves more easily than others towards being pushed on the gender marker to become from limited to significant. And we do work continuously, as Rouba mentioned, through training the staff to make sure that there's an awareness how they could improve on the marker without having set organization-wide any benchmark for the time being.
Thank you, Wiebke. Thank you, Carla. So the fourth question is, the comparison between markers in terms of planning and resources shows that the situation in terms of resources for gender equality is lower than in terms of planning. Is this a problem of not adequate tagging of the budget, or does that mean that many planned activities on gender equality are not implemented in the reality? Who wants to take the question? Carla?
Yeah, Carla. Okay, we intentionally put this example because we're, as I said, as I was explaining, that we're showing basically two different sets of information. We are able to pull out statistics on the number of outputs that are with the distribution of the outputs under the different various gender markers, as well as we showed the second pie chart where we are looking at the investments that we're doing also by gender marker. Now, if we have, let's say, 9% of, and here this specific example that was provided on the slide, it's specific to one sub-program. It is not across all ESCWA, so it's for only one area of work at ESCWA. We have other areas where the implementation and the data is actually different. But if I understand the question correctly, here you're talking about the difference between the two numbers. So here we're looking at maybe let's say 28% of gender blind in terms of number of outputs versus 10% in terms of resources spent or invested. That is not a problem because these are two different sets of information and they are meant to be looked at together. Because we look at the number, 28 are blind, but it doesn't mean that we're spending against all of our outputs in terms of non-post resources. Also there's another factor that kicks in, which is actually because we are still during the implementation phase, so we haven't finalized all of our expenditures yet. We haven't used all of our budget to implement all of our outputs. So there are two factors here, and depending on the numbers that we're looking at and where we are at which stage of the cycle, then we will be able to decide whether we actually have a problem or not. So this is all to give us an indication, and it's two sets of information that are produced from two different systems, and they do not need to match in terms of percentage. Thank you.
I would like to add something, if I can, to that, for the participant who asked that question. These two views are imperative for us to have, to see and to identify those outputs that actually do carry also a lot of money, because ideally we want the right side, the spending, to be higher than on the high gender markers than the outputs. Because let's say we're having a publication for which we spent a lot of resources, yet there are only 2 publications per sub-program in a biennium. If these carry the most resources, then that would mean that the impact of these 2 publications financially would be much higher than if these were 2, I don't know, information sheets that are that do not carry the financial weight. And since this is the year 1 where we actually have these 2 comparisons, it will allow us to also, if we wanted to go for a benchmarking at one point, it would allow us to strategically advance that our budget is actually put on those outputs and deliverables that carry the most financial weight. That's it.
Thanks a lot. So the next question, I think, is for Rouba. What process were done to overcome the first challenge?
Actually, as I said, the plan is still a plan. We had several discussions with senior management, and we hope that in the future we will be able to start the implementation. So far, the decision is to have as objective make the best of what we have in terms of gender mainstreaming and having all our outputs gender sensitive and the gender marking being at its highest in its highest categories. But we're also aware that in the future we can go further and based on the needs in the region gear our work towards a more specific objective, be it violence against women, be it women's empowerment. But for the time being, we're still in the general objective of mainstreaming throughout all our work.
Thank you, Rouba. So the sixth question is, how did you organize quality control? For instance, marking programs requiring substantial knowledge on gender gaps in a targeted program. And how much time did you spend in applying gender marker system? Who wants to take the question?
Yeah, I would say we've partially answered that question already, right? The quality control mechanisms that we do have in place at the different, we have a committee that looks at all the different publications. We do have a committee that looks in projects. We have an internal system that looks into the quality of all our meetings and provides feedback to meeting organizers, where we have a distribution by participants. We look into what I wanted to say, the documentations that go into a meeting to see how the gender dimension was applied. And Carla already explained, we have criteria for publications, but Rouba has also developed criteria for many other output types that we have. So this quality control, there is in the program, in the program support section, there is a section on program quality that deals with all those questions. On the question when it comes to substantive knowledge, that is the gender focal point network, which is heavily involved in the marker, in reviewing all the different pieces that we have to be able to identify. It's not really the gender gaps, but ECW, the Center for Women, for example, gives a lending hand on identifying research that has already been done on, just to give an example, gender in trade. It's maybe our trade section. There is so much that can be done that we direct our researchers to existing literature. How much time do we spend in applying the marker system? Well, not much, I have to say. In the beginning, for the planning, we review everything and we scrutinize. And then we have more fun pulling the data actually from our systems and enter in discussions with program managers on how they could improve. I couldn't really put a time tag on it. Carla, Rouba, how much time? 2 weeks in a year, maybe? Yeah.
Actually, here I want to underline the importance of capacity building. It's not quality control is of utmost importance, but also the capacity building, because as I said, we're working on various priorities and issues, and to make sure gender is mainstreamed, we're providing lots of capacity building on tools, equipment, on how to mainstream, but also on substance. For example, gender and macroeconomics, gender and I don't know, environment. And in environment, gender, we're trying to go even deeper, gender and water, gender and energy. So we're trying to provide these kind of capacity building for the staff as in the different division, for the focal points, so they can better support their colleagues. And this is also very important as important as quality control. This is one. And the second thing about time, it's not about applying the gender marker, but it's also the time we took in the beginning when we set the series of criteria to raise awareness about this criteria, how to use the marker, how to tag. But this we did it once, and we think that we will be repeating awareness raising and capacity building when we will be doing each and every program exercise on yearly or biennial basis. But the time is more into awareness raising and discussing and understanding rather than doing it technically, because as Carla and Wiebke have explained, technically it doesn't require much time. And I would go to the seventh question, unless Sabrina, you want to read it.
No, go ahead. You can read it.
Actually, what kind of argument we shared with the senior management to convince on the value added of putting in place GRB and ESCWA? Actually, the senior management is somehow convinced, and I think all what we could do at ESCWA is also because of the commitment of our senior management, and we have to say that it is the senior management that sent us to do this this course. So the engagement is here. We didn't need much argument to convince on the relevance now. Actually, we need more kind of dialogue and discussion to see how we can implement, where we can start, whether the entry points we selected are the most relevant ones, because we have our views, and I want also to mention that we're coming from like 3 different backgrounds: planning, budget, and gender fields, which is very good. So we can have like a comprehensive vision of this plan, but also we need to discuss more with the senior management on how to start, where, for how long would it be an implementation plan over 5 years, in the coming 2 years. So this kind of discussions rather than convincing. I think the conviction is here.
Thanks a lot, Rouba, for the clarification. So our last question for today is, have you considered to suggest an approach that all programs should contribute to achievement of gender equality, as it ensures gender-sensitive planning? Who wants to answer?
Actually, this is what we tried to say, that for the time being, we're trying that each and every output in the program is gender sensitive and geared toward gender equality. And this is what we're trying to ensure throughout the planning, the budgeting, and the overall process we're planning. Exactly, with the quality, with the mechanism for quality control, and with the all the needed infrastructure. No. Exactly, gender mainstreaming for to achieve gender equality. We're not sure about the question, but we think that this is. We hope that this answers questions.
Yeah, that should do. Thank you so much for replying to all the questions, Carla, Rouba, and Wiebke. And I'll give the floor to Elizabeth to close the webinar.
Well, thank you again. Really, I take many points from this presentation, and I'm sure it will be useful for participants. I hope we have the opportunity to meet again in 1 year or 2 to see the advancement of your work.
It will be 2 years later.
Okay. 2 years. And it was useful to see, your system, etc. So I wish you a very good luck for this GRB plan to be implemented, and see you in 2 years or before. Thank you also to participants to attend this webinar, and we continue in touch for within the campus for the participants or by email with other participants and with you, Carla, Wiebke, and Rouba. Bye-bye. Have an excellent week.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.